I'm Chris Dutchko, co-host of the Ninth Grade Experience podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Hello, Empowered Principals. Welcome to episode 325.
Welcome to the Empowered Principal Podcast, a not-so-typical educational resource that will teach you how to gain control of your career and get emotionally fit to lead your school and your life with joy by refining your most powerful tool, your mind. Here's your host, certified life coach, Angela Kelly Robeck.
Well, hello, my empowered leaders. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the podcast. And boy, do I have a very special guest here with you today, Daman Harris. He is the author of the Antiracist School Leader book that was published by Solution Tree. And the reason that Daman and I became connected was through a connection at Solution Tree. Her name was Jamila. We're so happy she connected us. And I'm honored to have him here on this podcast today because this is a topic that I don't speak of personally because it's not my wheelhouse. It's not my area of expertise. Obviously, as a white woman, as a white educator, it's not my place to actually teach this content, but I feel very passionate about it. I worked in a school that was extremely diverse and I felt really blessed. I felt like we had a lot of training, professional development, and conversations around equity and inclusion and diversity and ways that we could take note of how we were engaging on a daily basis. And anti-racism is something I consider to be like a mindset practice and a daily practice. It's not one and done. You don't become and then you're evolved. You are always growing and learning and evolving. There's more things to learn about, more things to discuss. And Daman is here today to have that conversation with us. So Daman, thank you so much for your time today.
I'm excited to be here, Angela. Thank you so much.
Oh, welcome. Welcome. We're just going to dive right in. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce yourself and tell the story that you shared with me earlier this week and how this book came to existence.
Gotcha. So again, my name is Daman Harris, and I am the manager of the Professional Development Schools Program and Higher Education Partnerships in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, which is between Baltimore and D.C., and we border Baltimore. We are a school district of about 85,000 kids in 125 schools or so. Schools and school districts in Maryland tend to be a little big. During the evening hours, I guess, my superhero work, I am the co-director of a nonprofit that supports efforts to recruit, retain, develop, and empower Black and Latino men in education. It's called the Building Our Network of Diversity Project, or BOND Project. And we are centered in Maryland as well, what we call the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, or the DMV, as a lot of folks know it locally. So we also have something coming up next month. It will be in April. It will be the Bond Academy. It's our yearly conference. You can go to bondeducators.org to find out more about that. I also do a lot of work. I've had in 28 years in public education, I've been in a bunch of different roles, like most of your empowered principal audience. So I've been the principal, I've been an assistant principal, I've been a school coach, I've been a district coach, I've been a bunch of different things, adjunct professor of graduate studies in a couple of different places. So I've gotten to see a lot of different schools and a lot of different districts and engage with a bunch of different folks. And over the years, I got into what folks call now, and I guess called it a little bit then, equity work, right around 2001. And when I travel around to talk about this work, when I am in whatever role, whatever capacity I'm serving at the moment, I still run into these same issues of equity. Mm-hmm. And my reading led me to believe, in my other anecdotal experiences, but conversations with other folks have led me to believe that there are some things that we haven't been touching on with respect to equity, at least not reckoning with them hard enough, or Brene Brown, like wrestling with them, these issues hard enough. And it is what's causing some issues that are sort of common threads throughout the work that we see as educators. And I gave an example that what you and I talked about in the past was to sort of have, and it's a chapter in the book, a passage in the book there's a graphic, but I'm going to try to give a visual to the audience, like to imagine a multi-line graph, right? Those line graphs, they show change over time. And you have 5 different lines, right? They're sort of in a hierarchy going across. And we think about this line graph over the years as positive outcomes in schools. So, and now we're going to think of each of those lines as a racial or ethnic group. And you can look without even thinking, if you have that visual in your mind of 4 or 5 lines going across in a hierarchy, demonstrating positive outcomes in schools, folks already know in your mind which racial or ethnic groups are in which position without having the lines labeled. And we know that to be the case. We feel it, we see it in our own context. And now, if you do the same graph, but change the topic to something negative, like dropout rates or suspensions, office referrals, the elementary school level. Now, you see those same lines, you know who's at the top. You know who's somewhere else and where we fall. And what I said to myself over time, and what I said to my staff when I was a principal, is these demographic hierarchies, these stagnant demographic hierarchies have been the same for 100 years. And we've changed a lot of things in our school and in our district in the last 10 years, in the last 20 years or more. But these hierarchies remain. We either have to believe that this is more because of the deficits of our kids and our families, or that there's a system. It's more about the system that is recreating this.
Right.
And it's not just the educational system, but that's where we have the most influence.
Yes.
And for now, I choose to believe that it's the latter, that systems do what they're created to do, they're designed to do.
Right.
Whether we state it that way or not. And so I believe that the thing we haven't reckoned with enough, we haven't wrestled with enough, is the impact of racism and white supremacy on the teaching and learning and just the overall construct of our system. So my staff, we had like a collective light bulbs going off as we were going through these issues. But I go around and talk to folks about this type of work. And I use antiracism specifically and not just equity. But when I go around and talk about this work, some folks have a light bulb go off as well, or they say, I've already had that light bulb. What I don't know is, what do I do next?
Right.
So how do I now get my school to this spot, to an anti-racist spot? And I talk about in the book, but just in general, about this is not an endpoint type of activity or phenomenon, right? This is an orientation or reorientation in a certain direction, and then move in that way as often as possible. Work. And so that's why I wrote the book, because I have these conversations with dozens, if not hundreds of folks, if not 100 folks plus. And so I thought there was an audience for this work. Now, I do know the last thing I say, and because I can run off at the mouth. I've been known to do that. Any staff.
It's your passionate.
I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I do know that title, The Antiracist School Leader. Using the word anti-racist in the chapter title is going to move half the country away from this work.
Yes.
I get it. What I hope is that it's not half of the state, like a whole state, right? Half of a state, perhaps. But now we can get some of those folks who are in those states, where half are split, to start doing some of this work and bringing all of their family members, all of our family members in this country to work collectively.
Yes. And that's why the title of this podcast is The Courage to Lead an Anti-Racist School, because the hardest first step, in my opinion, from my seat on this bus, is being a white person, having to understand just the definitions and the language around it, reading it and understanding the difference between different words, and how, interestingly, you said, like, we can talk about it in terms of equity, and everybody's very comfortable with the word equity. And we can use that word and kind of put it out there professionally and feel safe. But you say, we're going to lead an anti-racist school. Whoa, that has another emotional charge to it. And it's about leaning into that discomfort to educate yourself, to actually become more comfortable. And now all of a sudden, when you understand what anti-racist and anti-racism is and your effort to be an anti-racist school, what you see is that you're actually leaning in to what you want, which is equity, building equity, understanding equity, and creating platforms for equity, even at the smallest amount. Like one person isn't going to change an entire institution, a system that's been built by tons of people, but we can do at the micro level things every single day. The way we make decisions, the way we hold conversations, the way that we communicate, the way we set up our vision, those little things with mindfulness. And like, as you said, chapter 1 is all about educating yourself and committing to this movement and this way of being, I should say. It's not just a movement. I feel like it's a way of existing in the world. That starts with you internally.
Absolutely. And folks, sometimes we get a little nervous about using the word racism or anti-racism instead of equity, in part because sometimes we can feel like, and sometimes it's actually true that we get unfairly judged, right? Like, so we say, hey, if I say the wrong thing, I'll be labeled as racist. And then now people will treat me like a pariah in my community. And I don't want to engage in that type of work. And that shouldn't be the case, right? We have to make, as leaders, we have to cultivate psychologically safe environments where folks know that they can make mistakes. And it doesn't mean that because you said a certain thing, or even if you have a certain viewpoint, it doesn't mean that you are an evil person, an immoral person, you lack intelligence, or you don't have the information. None of that stuff is necessary with us having opposing points of view.
Uh-huh.
We just have different life experiences that brought us to have different perspectives.
Right.
And when we share those, each of us, not just the two of us, but all of us on this team, we share our different perspectives, our ideas are stronger, right? Everybody benefits.
Yes.
So it's okay to engage in this work. It's necessary to be uncomfortable. That's where the growth comes.
Right.
And we know that as principals, as school leaders.
Yes.
Right? You know that, audience, that nobody grows in spaces where they're totally comfortable. So let's figure out a way where we can hold hands and do this walk together.
Yes.
Get some collective life experiences that'll shape both of our perspectives.
Yes. That's one thing I really enjoyed that you shared with me the other day was I was asking you how, especially if you're a white person leading a school, especially a diverse school, and you want your students to be treated equitably and to have the opportunity to succeed and to change some of those lines, on that graph you were sharing about, I asked you, like, how does a leader start? Where do they start? And we talked about it starting internally, but you said something about creating space, like a safe space where the conversation becomes relatable. Can you share more about that? Like how leaders can create relatability amongst staff to order to create that safe space to have those conversations.
Definitely. And in some ways, I write a little bit about this in chapter 4, which is encouraging and embracing resistance to this work. Like I said before, when you get people that poke holes in your ideas and poke holes in your logic, it makes your ideas stronger. So that you should invite all of that type of work. And if you have people, particularly people on your team, like your stakeholders, if you have those folks who care enough to give opposing points of view,
yes,
now you got a team you can work with, right? Like you got a team that can grow together. That's what you want. Now, if you have the folks, it's kind of like being in romantic relationships. The worst thing, the opposite of love is not hate. The opposite of love is indifference. Right. Mm-hmm. So like if you have people that are ambivalent, that they are just indifferent to the work, disengaged, now you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
The problem isn't the people that push back. You need those folks on your team. So one of the pieces that I write about in chapter 4, there's a table there, and they're on page 122, where I list, here are some potential expressions of resistance. Like people express a disbelief in anti-dark racism. right? Like, so,
Yes.
what do I do about that? Or people shout cliches in public forums. What do I do about that? Or people feel like they can't make mistakes. So I don't want to engage in this work because I don't want to be labeled racist. But what do I do about that? Right. And in chapter 4, I lay out a couple counter moves that people can use when they engage in some of that type of stuff. Now, before I say the one that you described, where you said, what do people say? Like, I don't really see the racism. Like, what can I do with that? I'll come back to that one. I need to start with, what are we doing when people put stuff on social media about it? So here's my recommendation. Ignore them.
Yeah.
That is that, right? Fred Jones, in his book, Tools for Teaching, that he wrote back in the early 90s, Fred Jones said, and he wrote that about discipline issues, but he said, if you are lured into an emotional exchange by a student, in his case, but for me, someone who's clearly disinterested in any productive outcome, right? Then if you engage in that activity, you are agreeing to be a co-star in a play that is written, produced, directed, and marketed by the provocateur.
It's so good.
Don't take the bait, right? Fred was saying that three decades ago. So I'm urging folks to do that now, because that is where we spend too much of our time, is chasing shadows in social media. So, but to come back to when folks say, I know some individuals can be racist, but I don't know if the whole system can be set up to be racist. Like, I don't know if I believe that. And in my case, I had a staff that majority were white women from upper middle class, which was pretty much the demographic sort of nationally how it plays out in schools. And what I was able to do is have a conversation with some of them and say, hey, you've seen sexism and misogyny out there, right? And they said, yeah, of course. Like, you can tell. And they named different examples. Look at the Fortune 500, or look at our school districts in terms of the leaders in our checks, right? Like, we are mostly female staff, but mostly majority male administration. Like, there's just a bunch of different roadblocks along the way. You can cry, Damon, and it's cool and endearing. If I cry, then it's not, right? Like, it is weakness and being driven by emotion, and all of those things can be true. And I said, and I can't see those as well as you, because those are obstacles that I don't face, which is why I ask you to help me see those things and how we work to counteract those things that are happening to you and our female babies that are here in our schools.
Yes.
It's the same. It's analogous to racism, right? It's hard for us to see the obstacles we don't face.
Right. But it doesn't mean it's not there.
Right. And we can work together to engage with folks who've experienced that and work on it together.
Yes. And that's why I love chapter 1 is all about like familiarizing yourself. And you gave resources of places people could go to get started. And here's what I think about that. Like, there are facts out in the world. There's statistics, there's data, just like you can prove in a court of law that sexism exists. Whether you believe it is a different thing, but there are facts out there that indicate people behaved in a way under the influence of sexism, right? And the same is true for racism. You might not feel like you're acting out of racism, or you might not believe in racism, but there are facts out in the world separate from your beliefs that indicate acts that hinder student success. And that have nothing to do with their intelligence, that have everything to do with the color of their skin and the way that they look. And, it goes on and on, like the ways that the brain will identify people. And I want to make that clear that there are facts out in the world, and then there are your beliefs about those facts. And those are separate. And that's what we're talking about. Like, you can sit and argue whether there are facts or not facts and get into this engagement with people that you're not going to find productive or fruitful. Those are not your people. The people you want to work with at your school, think about it. There's always a teacher on campus who is like the negative, like the no, thank you. I'm going to be a struggle to work with. That's not your go-to person. When you're starting these conversations, you go to the people who they already believe in the facts. They already see them. They already support them, and they might not know the next steps, but you're not fighting an uphill battle on a belief system based on facts and the interpretation of those facts.
And there are facts that are present in every school district that are particular to the local context. I'll give some examples. These aren't actual statistics for anybody's school district in the audience, but I'm giving a couple of examples of how these facts could be partially the result of, or primarily the result of, problematic policies that are part of the system that are baked into what we do that lead to racially disparate outcomes. And if a school says, I don't know what our data is related to this, then it's on you now to go and search that out. Now you know that you need to be doing this type of work. Let's find out. So for instance, maybe there is 26% of Asian students might reply to an end of the year climate survey that indicates that they don't feel personally connected to the content in the curriculum. Problematic policy, right? So that's a fact. That's a data point. Now, problematic policy, there could be school curricula aren't, and instructional practices or the materials of instruction aren't regularly audited for cultural relevance, right? And racial representation. So if that's a part of your system, then that's why that outcome, that could be a big part of why that outcome is there. And so if you don't know if your Asian students feel connected to the curriculum because you haven't asked, somebody in your district needs to ask, right? If not, because that's a part of the system. That's what I'm talking about, right? If we say 35% of our Hispanic caregivers don't attend parent conferences when school staff conduct everything in English, right? If these folks are non-English speakers, they conduct everything in English and they do everything during the school day, right? A 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 window. So again, those are problematic policies that lead to racially or ethnically disparate outcomes. And if you don't know that data, go find out about your school or your district. That's the work. So yes, you can ignore some of these data points, but it's willful at this point.
It is willful. And it's also, it doesn't serve you or your vision. Even if your vision doesn't include anti-racism necessarily, let's say it includes equity. Most of them include equity, which, like, anti-racism is how you get to creating more equitable schools. But if you are like looking at that data and looking for how can we make this better, right? Start with your RTI. Look at your RTI kids, look at your SPED kids, right? There's data that's going to tell you what's going on in those two groups, but it behooves you as a leader, your vision to move your school forward, to have more students working on and above grade level. This is the work that gets you there, because those children need us to look at that data and to interpret it in a way that's like, what is going on here? I feel like we keep trying the same thing over and over, expecting different results. We know that's insanity, but yet here we are putting the same kids in RTI, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. And then we say, like, RTI is not working, or, oh, these kids we got to put them into, I guess they need special ed. Is it that, or is it the system that we're implementing within our school? I'm saying what's in our control, within the system of our school. That is where this courageous conversation can take place. Like, look, this kid has been in for 3 years. It's not the kid. It's our system.
Right. And this kid knows every lyric to every Taylor Swift song. Right? How can that kid know that? But this kid can't read.
Yes.
So yes, the kid can. We are not making the connections that are necessary for this kid to thrive.
Right. And here's the other thing I want to say about this. Like, having been a school leader of a very diverse school, I had to sit in meetings that were uncomfortable and have conversations about curriculum and engagement and certain strategies that we use in our classrooms that are deemed best practice, but best practice for whom? It tends to be best practice for the kids who are already being successful, because if kids aren't being successful, then to me, that's not a best practice. And I, as the school principal, had to be able to say, like, my teacher was taught to use these best practices, but I'm just saying, like, these best practices might not actually be best practice for everyone on our campus. And what would it look like for these children to have best practice. Like, what does that look like for them? And just having that conversation and being okay. Like, you're not at fault. I think this is the thing. Like, we're afraid to have this conversation because we're scared we've done it wrong. We're going to be in trouble. People are not going to like us, or there's some big, scary, like social negative outcome that will occur. But the truth is the opposite. It actually opens us up to deeper connection, deeper conversations, and actually becoming a better educator.
Absolutely. And it's analogous to what we tell our students.
Right.
It's okay to make mistakes. You have to try some new things, engage with some new folks, learn what we call that effective effort, right? Like, we know we're working hard. Now let's use some strategies that we can add to that hard work like we can leverage that to make even greater gains. And it's okay if we mess up. We learn the wrong way, and now we do it a little differently the next time. We do the same thing with our students. And we tell our students, we'll be here. If you mess up, we are right here with you all the way along. And we're going to do the same for each other.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Because this isn't about creating a culture of blame, but it's also not about abdicating. It's like taking ownership and responsibility, but as a collective ownership, collective responsibility versus isolated blame or responsibility. This isn't an individual problem to solve. This is a community, a collaborative, like a cohesive problem to solve that together. I love when you said, like, when people poke holes, it just makes your idea stronger. That is so true, because it helps you see, and I'm a coach, like I'm a life and leadership coach for school leaders. So what I do is I help people. I think about, you're driving a car, but you have no mirrors and you can only see this way. And then these conversations are the mirrors to help you see somebody coming in on the side, is, the police on what's happening, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the collective whole is about us putting on as many mirrors as possible to see all the angles, all the perspectives. And then when you have that level of vision, then you can see very easily the solution, the next best solution. Like, I invite these conversations and bring them in. Ooh, what you got there?
So it struck me because I was about to extend the car metaphor a little bit. So I grabbed a book off my shelf, Building Equity book from Dominique Smith, Nancy Fry, Ian Pumpian, and Doug Fisher. In their work, they write about connecting to cultures in equity and how the view from the sidewalk, they say, is way different than the view from the windshield. And what I took that to mean is, like, to extend that car metaphor a little bit, but I didn't want to take credit for the metaphor, is that cultural piece as well, like the anti-racist piece, that cultural relevant piece. You have to get out into the community to build connection, to understand the circumstances that surround your students and their families in order to make sure you are serving them well, via the curriculum, via instruction, via family engagement, however. But you have to be there too, like that. So that car metaphor, it just rang a bell.
Yes. No, I love that. And I was thinking about this work. I know school leaders, when they listen to this podcast, they want something. They're listening to it on their commute and they want to jump out of the car and then run into the building and apply the knowledge today to solve the next problem. I'm going to caution you against that, especially with this topic. And here's why. And actually with most of my concepts, like, there are tangible things you can go apply today, but this work in particular, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel that this work is like a slow internal growth process. You read and you contemplate and you look for where it occurs in your own life, professionally and personally. And then as you understand this and you practice it, you can practice it on your own. But before you run into a staff meeting and say, hey, here's a book study we're going to do, and hey, here's the new vision for our school. This is a slow, internal, thought-provoking, contemplative work, in my opinion, at least from where I stand, my perspective, that I encourage you listeners to not, everybody go buy this book immediately, but then slow your roll. This is not going to be solved overnight. I think we have this thing in education where we got to save these kids right here, right now, everybody all at once. That is when you get overwhelmed. That is when you roll out without truly having your vision prepared and understood to be able to communicate it so people can connect with it. Am I on track at all?
I totally agree. And that folks Well, and I also think folks can begin to do some of the work.
Yes.
But
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. And I think folks are also driven by some of the sentiments of themselves or their staff where they say, hey, just give me something to do right now. Like, I can't have this staff meeting, this PD, without walking away and saying, here are the things you can apply right now. So I certainly agree with the statement, Angela. And what I tell folks is, if that's the case, when my staff, we had a similar conversation, and I put up on the screen during one of our staff meetings, I said, here's an internet search for anti-racist instructional practices. 3-point-something seconds, it's 900,000 hits on the internet. You don't need me to tell you like what practices you can try. Our work together is on why you haven't done that already. Like, that's the work. And so if folks are riding here, like, I just need to employ something when I get out of my car and walk in, do an internet search on anti-racist leadership, school leadership practice. Click Amazon or Solution Tree and buy my book. And there's a thing, right? There are some steps in my book that say these things.
I love it. You have it broken down into like think, or know, say, and do. So here's what to know, here's what to say, and here's what to do. It's very simple and practical, that section. I like it.
Yeah. And folks, at the end of each chapter, that's how that's laid out. And so you could have the first chapter is educating yourself and committed. There's a lot of content about a bunch of different work. Probably 100 folks have done this type of work already. So you can learn, like I am, learn from those folks, share what you're learning with your colleagues. Like, find a colleague that you can be an accountability partner with and talk to, or call Angela and say, hey, I need some coaching on this stuff.
Yeah.
Great shit. I'm sure you'd be an accountability partner with some folks.
Yeah,
so you
absolutely.
have people, you have a support network that's built in. You just have to act on it.
Right. No, that's so great, because especially when you're doing this work here, to me, the biggest feeling, the biggest emotion you're going to feel is vulnerability. And that it feels very scary, and your nervous system will go off. You're going to go into fight or flight when you read things that trigger you. And look, I believe in educators. I believe in their hearts. You do not go into this field for the most part without pure intention, positive intention, to help all of the children, all of the people. And when you become a principal, your goal is to help support all of your staff. Now, you're going to have the thought like, oh, I'm doing it wrong, or I should have known better, or I don't want to offend anybody, right? Like, there are thoughts that white people have in trying to get it right and trying to be inclusive and be kind and be loving and be supportive. And I think of racism as like, who said this? I think it was Glennon Doyle, where she said, it's in the air we breathe. Like, you don't understand that systemic racism and all the isms are the air that you breathe. You're not out there seeking it. It's just a part of your intake and the way we've been conditioned to think and believe and to feel and to act. And all of that, we're not asking you to change or that you're doing it wrong. We're simply saying ponder, question, contemplate, examine, explore, open to possibilities, open to the idea that some of this conditioning you weren't even aware of.
And I heard Brene Brown, she interviewed Ibram Kendi a few years ago on her podcast. And they had a conversation. I don't remember whose idea it was to talk about it like this, but they said that it's like being in a steady rain of this type of information that we're all just being inundated by. And someone says, hey, here's an umbrella. And so now you got an umbrella so you can be defended from some of it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good one.
But you don't have shame from somebody handing you an umbrella.
Right.
Like, so it's okay to say, I didn't know, and I'm getting better. And the beautiful part about this work for school leaders is your students, their families, and your staff love you. They know you. They know your intention. So they will give you the grace to make mistakes.
Yes.
And they will also give you the grace to help cast a vision that you believe will be better for everybody in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's why you build a shared vision with voices. And we talked about this, like having voices heard on campus, having your Asian voices heard, like, do you connect to this curriculum, or I'm thinking elementary school, but you having adults like monitor that kind of thing. And that's why you ask for the voices, so that your vision can be inclusive. You cannot create a vision by yourself and then consider it to be inclusive. It doesn't work like that. The voices are what create the inclusivity and create the diversity, I think. And there are holes that you cannot fill. It's like, again, driving the car with mirrors. You just can't see. There are blind spots in all of our visions, and it becomes a more comprehensive vision when we include and ask for those voices, not out of like, where am I doing it wrong, but how do we make this stronger, better together?
And sometimes folks can get stuck a little bit with thinking about anti-racism or white supremacy and white supremacy culture, and get confused with saying that white supremacy is the same as white people, and it's not. Right. And so there's a lot of different terms that we conflate, like race and culture, right? I don't say that there's a Black culture, right? Black as a race is a social construct. That's a whole nother show. But I don't say race and culture are the same thing. I don't say white supremacy means white people, right? That is counterproductive because we're all on the same family. And so it also lets people of color off the hook. For us, I am a person of color, by the way. Like, it lets us off the hook by saying we don't sometimes uphold white supremacy culture, right? Like, of course we can. So it is more about this supposed hierarchy that a lot of us don't necessarily believe, right? We're not actively trying intentionally to recreate this hierarchy. But sometimes when it's in the air we breathe, when it's in the water in which we swim, when it's that steady rain, we do it unconsciously.
Yes. Yes. So this book is the umbrella.
There you go.
This book is the umbrella. That's how I feel about it. And it's such a good read. I'm only a few chapters in, you guys, but I don't typically have like authors. I don't typically sit here and like shout out to the rooftops a book, because we're not a book podcast, but I am an anti-racist. I want to promote anti-racism in schools. I did the work to the best of my ability back, 10 years ago when I was a school leader, and I value this work. And I want all of you to feel, number one, just to have the courage to read it yourself and let yourself feel those feels. And if you need help with that, come on over for coaching, because that's what I help you with. I'm going to help you process the emotion. But really, I want you to step into your empowerment. This is the Empowered Principal podcast, and empowerment means empowerment for all. And the way that you can be a more valuable, more empowered leader is to empower every single student and staff member on your campus. And this book will help you get there.
Amen.
Yes.
You are only alone insofar as you choose to be. There are so many people out here doing this work and thinking about this stuff that you do not have to be alone.
No, I love that. Okay. I know we've gone way over time, but I just want to ask, is there any one last words of wisdom, shout out, like a tip, strategy? Is there anything you just want to say in closure here? Because I want to encourage people to get the book, but I also know you're listening to this and you're running into school or you're driving home for the day. Like, I just want you to plant a little seed for them as they're heading off into their work week.
Yep. So you can find out more about the book or me and some of the work that I do at my website, damanharris.com, DAMAN. You can think of me as Daman Harris.
Love it.
.com. And as you walk into your building today, I'd like you to just think about how you already have the skills to do this work.
Yes.
You already have the staff to do this work. You might just need a little bit more of the knowledge and a few more connections to do this work. But greatness for your students and your staff with respect to this work is just on the other side.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what we're all here for. That's what we're all here for. So all of Damon's contact information, links will be in the show notes. So you guys can just drop down in your whatever podcast platform you listen to check out the book, check out his links, check out his website. But this work is the solution to move your school forward and to take out some of the obstacles that are in students' ways. I often say, like, yes, we cannot change state testing, maybe necessarily right now, but what we can do is we can put the conversation into perspective around the scores and what they mean, because students do better when they believe in themselves. Our work is not about raising test scores. That's not the goal. The goal is to help students break down barriers, thought obstacles, belief systems about themselves that break them free from believing they're not capable, or that, the test is too hard, or that they can't learn, or they can't read, or math is no fun. Whatever the thought systems are driving these students to not put in all of their effort into this test, it's not about the test. It's about the beliefs of the students and the beliefs of the teachers. And this book is going to help you break down the obstacles and give you some practical solutions to empower students to believe in themselves, to become lifelong learners, which is why we're in this in the first place.
And chapter 6, Evaluate Your Anti-Racist Impact, has a list of a bunch of different types of data you can collect in addition to that state test data.
Awesome.
That can tell your story.
So good. Thank you. Thank you. This, I think, is going to be a powerhouse of an episode. If you're listening to this, please share it with your fellow colleagues, share it with your district staff. If you're having a hard time maybe coaching up, you can lead them to the podcast, let them listen to this, and let them think about the book, or maybe buy this book as a gift for some people that maybe you need their support in getting this conversation started at a district level. But I think this is the beginning of just breaking across some barriers that we haven't been able to do in education. So thank you for your time. Thank you for this book. Thank you for your knowledge and wisdom. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Angela. It was great to be here.
Great. Thank you so much.
Hey, Empowered Principal. If you enjoy the content in this podcast, I invite you to join the Empowered Principal Collaborative. It's my latest offer for aspiring and current school leaders who want to experience exceptional impact and enjoy the school leadership experience. Look, you don't have to overwork and overexert to be a successful school leader. You'll be mentored weekly and surrounded by supportive, like-minded colleagues who truly understand what it means to be a school leader. So join us today and become a member of the only certified life and leadership coaching program for school leaders in the country. Just head on over to angelakellycoaching.com/work-with-me to learn more and join. I'll see you inside of the Empowered Principal Collaborative.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Empowered Principal Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more, please visit angelakellycoaching.com, where you can sign up for weekly updates and learn more about the tools that will help you become an emotionally fit school leader.